Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see you all. I know the 12 to 1 time on Wednesdays can be a tight block, and so I know we'll have more folks joining us from other buildings, but so glad you all are here. My name is Ricky Morrow Spitzer. I'm a Senior Associate Director for Inclusive Dialogues and Leadership in the Office of the Vice Provost for Institutional Inclusive Excellence. And I am thrilled to welcome you all to this afternoon's program, Public Health as Liberation, featuring Latham Thomas. Before we begin our formal program today, I would just like to take a moment to acknowledge the land that we sit on. This land is the territory of the Massachusetts, Pawtucket, and their neighbors, the Wampanoag and Nipmuc peoples, who have stewarded this land for hundreds of generations. We extend our respect to the citizens of these nations who live here today, their ancestors who have lived here for over 500 generations, and to all Indigenous people. To kick off our program today, I'd like to invite Elena McCauley to the stage. Elena serves as the Assistant Vice Provost for Inclusive Excellence and Leadership at Tufts University, where she leads the university's strategic efforts to cultivate a more inclusive, collaborative, and collegial campus culture. Now in her second year at Tufts, Elena designed and continues to lead the Elevate Inclusive Excellence strategic vision, advancing transformative experiences for students, staff, and faculty in an inclusive academic environment. Please help me in welcoming Elena.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Good afternoon. I think we can officially say that now. Thank you for joining us in person as well as on our live stream for our Public Health is Liberation event featuring our esteemed guest speaker, Latham Thomas. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the labor of those who often go unseen, including our IT and operations team for helping us set up the event space, as well as Tufts Catering for providing a very tasty lunch. We hope you take some to go if you want some, if there's still left over. To my Institutional Inclusive Excellence team for putting this event together, specifically Lisa Bloom, Ricky Morrow Spitzer, as well as Taylor Rogers for all of their contributions. So public health isn't just about preventing disease, it's about protecting the future. For Black communities, it has always been a form of liberation. The right to breathe clean air, the right to access affordable, nutritious food, the right to safe housing free from mold and other toxins, the right to quality and culturally responsive healthcare, the right to mental health and healing, the right to reproductive justice and bodily autonomy, the right to be seen, heard, and believed, the right to have pain acknowledged, the right to have experiences validated, the right to have lives treated as worthy of care, the right to live long enough to dream, and the right to live and thrive without apology. When we talk about Black history, we must speak of Black futures, and both have been about survival and collective care. From midwives and mutual aid networks to civil rights leaders demanding access to healthcare, public health has long been a quiet but radical tool of Black liberation. Today, we honor the many public health leaders, healers, and organizers who chose liberation and continue to choose liberation so that future generations across all communities might live, imagine, and thrive collectively. Today, we are pleased to welcome leading women's health expert, Black maternal health advocate, entrepreneur, professor, and best-selling author, wow, a bio, Latham Thomas, who will offer a brief presentation before going into conversation with Tufts' very own Dr. Vanessa Robinson. Please allow me to introduce you to Latham Thomas. Latham Thomas is the founder of Mama Glow, a global maternal health and education platform with a community of over 3,000 doulas across the US and 6 continents. She serves on the Kate Spade New York Social Impact Council, Tufts Nutrition Council, and the Community Advisory Board for Northwell Health Moms Program. Latham helms the Mama Glow Doula Homeschool Professional Training Program and launched the annual award-winning Doula Expo by Mama Glow, coined the Coachella for Birth Workers and Families by Good Morning America. Recognized as one of Oprah's Super Soul 100, Latham has supported numerous celebrity clients, including Alicia Keys and Anne Hathaway, authored 2 best-selling books, and recently launched a guided meditation audio program, Peaceful Parenting. With over 20 years of experience in women's health advocacy, Latham is a sought-after speaker and leads award-winning culture-shifting campaigns that advance maternal health. Please join me in welcoming Latham to the stage.
Is the mic on? Okay. I feel like I don't have to say anything because that was such a beautiful acknowledgement and opening, and it's such a reminder of how we should show up in community and especially in academic spaces and universities. And so thank you all for modeling that, for the invitation to be here. And it's so lovely to see y'all. Happy Black History Month. It has been a month and we're only a few days in. So I would like to start with an acknowledgement as well before I share remarks. I stand here today resting on the shoulders of so many who have come before me. I'm the descendant of Terry Anita Carter and William C. Thomas, of Barbara Jean Latham and John Poole Carter, who descended from mighty men and women who navigated and survived the horrors of enslavement, land theft, genocide, and sang lullabies as they carried babies on their hips, escaping the clutches of Jim Crow terror. I am the scent of sweet vanilla bean, coconut milk, and ripe sun-kissed mango in the summertime and fresh cinnamon bark. I am the sound of fried okra crackling in a cast iron skillet. I am the taste of honeycomb harvested from deep in the dark, damp forest. I am from Brooklyn by way of Oakland, California. And I believe that we come from a mighty people. I am committed to healing, to birthing, and teaching through joy. I am Latham Thomas, mother of Fulana Librizzi. My pronouns are she, her. And my intention is to be obedient to my calling as a birth keeper. I honor the ancestors and the midwives, community healers, root doctors, brujas, and birth workers, the caregivers, healers who come before me, those who poured into me, laid hands on me, and blessed my path, those who crossed over into the spirit realm, and those who practiced out of kitchens and back porches, those who cultivated the land and kept us tethered to it, whose hands would catch Black babies in the moonlight and whose prayers were blankets that covered us. Those who would sing hymns while stirring pots of greens and swaying hips and house shoes with elbows glistening of Vaseline. Those whose voices braided scripture into our souls and turned sorrow into lullabies. Those who sat with grief and alchemized their pain. Those who knew the language of roots and remedies, of camphor and castor oil, if you know about it, of nettles and Queen Anne's lace, of lavender tucked in pillowcases. Those who cloaked themselves with medicine, had tincture in the cabinet and weeds out back that could get rid of that cough. And those who would help bring the baby down, who knew the herbs that would bring the baby down. Ones who midwife miracles with calloused fingers and who read the skies like scripture and moved through the world with the ancestral hush of knowing. Those who carried psalms in their back pocket, mothers who dreamt in stolen hours and whose laughter was low and full like thunder wrapped in the sweetness of honey. Birth workers who held the threshold open between breath and body, between spirit and becoming, whose very presence stitched the veil between worlds, standing as a witness, as weeping willow and as wellspring. They stood at the altar and the offering, those who always remembered even when the world forgot us, those whose magic lived in each of us that is here today. It was these women who I lift up, who fortified our communities in the good times and even when institutions failed us. And so we, my beloveds, are the living prayers of our ancestors made manifest. We are carrying forward a lineage of resistance and resilience and of radical community care. Say yes? Are y'all awake? Say yes? Yes. All right. And so I want to, begin with a little bit of focus on what the theme is here, right? As we think about public health as liberation. And I open with words of invocation because I think it's so important in Black history to really center the work that we do that's grounded in healing and that's grounded in storytelling that is woven in our history and our lineages. And so this moment is really an opportunity for us, I think, to gather in sacred pause together and think about not only the past, but the history and the future that we get to shape together. And Black history is really a living inheritance. It lives in our breath, it lives in our bodies, our resilience, it lives in the wisdom of our grandmothers and the imagination of young people like you. And today, I really want to center public health because when we center and think about it, I think a lot of us focus on infrastructure, policy, we think about vaccines, we think about hospitals, data sets, and all that really matters. It's very important. But public health is also at its core about structural conditions that impact our communities writ large, right? And it's about whether people have the necessary conditions to live fully expressed in their bodies, right? And was so beautifully spoken, this principle of reproductive justice, which we'll come back to, but we should have the freedom to live fully expressed. And so think about the quality of the air you're breathing. What is the quality of the air that you breathe? That if you have access to clean water or nutritious food, or if you can move freely without fear, that is also a privilege. Can you give birth safely? Can you rest with ease? Public health is really about who gets to thrive, right? It's the politics of who gets to thrive. And so when we begin to see it that way, we can understand something really powerful, that public health is actually political. I know y'all know that because y'all in school. But public health is also spiritual. It's about, power, and it's about how that power is distributed. And if we're honest, the history of and the story of public health in America cannot be separated from racism. It cannot be separated from the institution of slavery, from medical experimentation upon Black bodies, from forced sterilization, compulsory pregnancy, from redlining to environmental justice. Black bodies have historically been the sites of extraction, of labor, of knowledge theft, of experimentation without consent and without protection. And so when we talk about the work that I ground in, which is Black maternal health, today we're not talking about an isolated crisis, but really the continuation of a long trajectory. And in the United States, and I'm sure you all are very familiar with the statistics, but Black women are still far more likely to die from pregnancy-related complications than their white counterparts. And this disparity persists across income and education levels, right? So we can let that sink in, that education does not protect us, economic mobility does not protect us, fame and fortune does not protect us. And so the Black maternal health crisis is not a biological issue, it's really a systems issue. It's a listening issue, a humanity issue, right? And if public health is about conditions, then we really have to ask ourselves, what are the conditions that we created for Black women and femmes? What have we created for Black birthing individuals? And chronic stress, as we know it, stemming from living under racism and oppression, is a factor, right? Bias in clinical decision making is a factor. Under-resourced hospitals in predominantly Black neighborhoods is a factor. Lack of access to midwives and doulas, fragmented care systems, food deserts, environmental toxins, student debt, which is actually a reproductive justice issue, right? Let's call it what it is. Workplace discrimination. We know that from research on weathering that cumulative stress of racism ages the body and it impacts cardiovascular health, immune response. Obviously that impacts pregnancy outcomes, right? And so when a Black woman enters a hospital to give birth, she's not just bringing in her medical chart, she is bringing a lifetime of lived experience in racialized society. And so what does that mean? Liberation-centered public health, we should be thinking about asking ourselves, really, what is it to disrupt this cycle? How can we change this? How can we interrupt this pattern? And as a founder of Mama Glow, a global maternal health and education platform, I've had the privilege of training doulas, nurse care managers, working alongside families. And what I understand is that birth is not just a clinical event. It's an initiation. It's when someone crosses from one identity to another. It's a time that's also really communal. And at that moment, we're uniquely vulnerable. And it's a time where vulnerability reveals who we are as also as a society. Because think about how we actually treat mothers. Not sure if anybody knows this, but 1 in 4 women will go back to work 10 days after having a baby in this country. I'm gonna say that again. 1 in 4 women will give birth and head back to work 10 to 14 days after giving birth. That is the society that we live in. That is how we care for new mothers, and that is what we think about infants. And so, we are uniquely vulnerable at this time. When a woman says, I'm in pain, is that pain dismissed? When a Black woman says she's in pain, is that pain recognized? This is structural violence when people are not recognized in their pain. And so when we're pressured in interventions without informed consent, it's not empowerment, it's actually coercion, right? And so when we talk about liberation in birth, it's about informed choice as well. It means access to culturally congruent care, it means continuity of care, and it means being seen, heard, and respected, right? And really having our basic human needs met, which are safety, dignity, and belonging. And here's what we know. When Black birthing people are supported by doulas, their outcomes improve. Cesarean rates decrease, satisfaction increases, breastfeeding rates improve, and complications also decrease. And so we know community care works. It's a model that we've evolved in. And midwifery works, and relationship-centered care works. And so why are these models not considered the norm? Because liberation actually requires distribution, right? Distribution of funding, of authority, and of trust. It's a distribution of power. And so that's where all of you come in, right? Students that will help shape our future. You're the thinkers, the leaders, the scientists, the policymakers. Some of you will go into medicine, some in public policy, some in business, some into art and storytelling, some into engineering and technology. And every single one of you has a role in public health. You're studying, if you're studying economics, for instance, you can examine how budgets reflect values. If you're studying engineering, you can design better medical technologies and account for diverse bodies. If you are studying political science, you can advocate for Medicaid expansion and dual reimbursement. If you're studying media, you can challenge harmful narratives about Black motherhood. If you are studying medicine, you can interrogate bias and diagnostic algorithms. So liberation is also interdisciplinary, right? And before we really get into action, we also talk about awareness that begins with education and not just sanitized versions of history, but learning about J. Marion Sims and his experimentation on Black enslaved women, and learning about Henrietta Lacks, and learning about forced sterilizations of Black and Indigenous women, learning about the ways in which obstetrics as a field marginalized midwives, many of whom were Black women providing community-centered care. This history is not meant to really induce guilt, but also to inspire responsibility to plant seeds of change. Because once you know, you can't unknow. And the next step is really self-examination, because we all swim within the waters of bias. And research shows that we have medical trainees that falsely believe that Black people have higher pain tolerance, that they are impervious to pain. That myth rooted in slavery still impacts treatment, also impacts health funding. So we have to ask ourselves, what assumptions do I carry about whose pain is real, whose voices are credible, and whose bodies are compliant? So liberation requires humility. It requires more listening than speaking. It requires following the leadership of those most impacted and centering their voices. As Black women have been leading this work for generations, reproductive justice as a framework created by Black women activists reminds us that justice is not just the right to have a child, but the right not to have a child, the right to raise that child in safety, dignity, and sustainable communities. And so public health is about liberation. That is public health as liberation. It expands the lens on the hospital room to housing policy, environmental policy, gun violence prevention, climate justice. Because what is the point of surviving childbirth if you cannot safely raise your child? So what does it look like to take action on this campus here? It looks like supporting student organizations that center Black health and wellness. It looks like pushing for culturally competent counseling services. It looks like advocating for paid internships so that students from marginalized communities can pursue careers in healthcare without financial strain. It looks like partnering with community-based maternal health organizations in the Boston area, as well as nutrition-based organizations in the Boston area. It looks like using your research to support grassroots grants instead of extractive academic projects. It looks like how you care for one another. We live in a culture that glorifies exhaustion, that tells you your worth is tied to productivity only. And I know y'all get that message in school. However, burnout is not liberation. Let's say that together. Burnout is not liberation. Especially for students of color who are navigating predominantly white institutions, stress is real and isolation can be real. And so collective care means really asking, how are you really, right? It means sharing notes, it means cooking meals together, because all y'all know how to cook in here, I know that. And it means checking on the friend who hasn't been to class. It means that we can build systems that tell us not to override the signals of our bodies, not to or ignore fatigue, not to ignore our intuition, not to ignore our pain. And body leadership is really the antidote. And so that means that you practice being present in your own body so you can be present with others. It means that you regulate your nervous system. It means you learn to pause before reacting. It means that you cultivate empathy as a skill, but not a slogan. And it means when you're in body, you can listen differently. When you're in body, you can design solutions differently, and you can lead differently. And this matters in healthcare spaces the most. Because imagine a hospital where every provider paused before entering a room and took one breath and remembered the humanity of the person they were about to encounter. That alone could change outcomes. And so liberation does not always begin with grand gestures. Sometimes it begins with a breath and a question, with believing someone the first time. And so this Black History Month, I believe, teaches us that progress is the result of organized love. From mutual aid societies to freedom schools to Black Panther Party's free breakfast programs, shout out to Oakland, our communities have always understood that health and liberation are intertwined, and not just health and liberation are intertwined, but the community is at the center of healthcare. The Panthers just didn't talk about revolution. They fed children, they offered medical clinics, they addressed sickle cell anemia when few others would, and that is public health as liberation. And so it's practical, it's community rooted, and it's visionary. And so I invite you to imagine boldly and to imagine a future where states fund education for students of color. Imagine hospitals partnering with community as equals. Imagine research agendas set by the needs of people in the community themselves. Imagine paid parental leave as a given. Imagine neighborhoods free from environmental toxins. Imagine no policing. Imagine a culture that celebrates Black motherhood instead of scrutinizing it. When we design systems for those most marginalized, we create systems that are more humane for all. And so I ask you to think about what you'll design, right? In this time, when we think about Black history, we also center Black futurism, which is an amazing, beautiful pathway that we get from our literary ancestors like Octavia Butler and Audre Lorde. And we can think about what we'll design, right? Because you are the future. So what will you disrupt, what will you defend, but also what will you construct? And I like to think about this because there's two kind of sides you can be on. One is destructing or deconstructing or tearing something apart, and one is building, right? And you can be on both, but there's certain times in our lives where we sit squarely into one of those areas, right? And a lot of us are really committed to scrutinizing, thinking about reforming, transforming something, but also tearing things down, right? Which necessarily need to happen. But there's also people who are really committed to building and can build a future. And so think about what we can build when everything is falling apart around us. There's gonna be a need for a place to go. And what are you all gonna build so that when we all stand up from the ashes, we can see that place manifest. We can see that place already in motion, already built, already thought through, because you had the dream and the vision to bring it forth, but also the tenacity to stay committed to building it in community, because you dreamt it and you knew it was real, but you also knew it was necessary, right? What will you build? What will you create? And so social change has always been catalyzed by young people on college campuses, y'all. Don't get it twisted. It's always been about young people. And young people who've decided that good enough wasn't enough, right? And so this month, let's not be performative, let's be formative, right? And let's think about how we are moving. Let's shape how we move, how we study, how we practice, and how we allocate resources, how we show up in rooms where decisions are made. And think about public health, not just as managing populations, but about honoring people. Because liberation is not an abstract ideal, it's a daily practice. And it's believing Black women, it's believing and funding Black-led institutions, it's examining bias, it's practicing collective community-centered care. And it's aligning policy with love, right? And love is an action. Love is rigorous, it's accountable, but it's transformative. And love actually incites change. And so may you all be the generation that reimagines healthcare, that generation that understands that justice is actually preventative care, because that's liberation, and that's Black history in action. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you. I'll just leave this here.
Let's give Latham another round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Truly. As we mentioned, we're going to turn it to a formal Q&A, and I'm going to transition to introducing our moderator for today, Dr. Vanessa Robinson, who is an assistant professor at Tufts University School of Medicine and the CREST director at Tufts Clinical and Translational Science Institute. With a background in health policy, she focuses on addressing inequities in maternal health and nutritional science through research, advocacy, and in community engagement. I can't think of a better person to moderate this conversation. Yeah. Dr. Robinson is the chief report editor and lead technical writer for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Special Commission's report on racial inequities in maternal health, recognized as the blueprint report for the Bill of Acting and Promoting Access to Midwifery Care and Out-of-Hospital Birth Options, Bill H4999. She has also presented at Harvard Medical School and Tufts Medicine Women, Mother, and Baby Research Institute, advising on equitable and innovative models of maternal health care and delivery. Towards the end of our program, we'll actually invite the audience to consider some questions as well, but we did ask for audience questions in advance, so Vanessa will come to the stage and be able to ask that, but I'll turn it to you now. Welcome.
Woo!
Wow. I am so, is the mic on?
Yeah, we hear you.
I'm so amazed as to what you said. So I actually wrote some things down because I listen and I learn by repetition. So I just wanted to give that to you all. So when, of course, the lecture is focused on public health as liberation. And so this is what I heard from you in your talk. Liberation is interdisciplinary, requiring humility, self-examination, establishing sustainable communities, empathy used as a skill or applied as a skill and not as a slogan, a sacred pause. And what I also appreciated is that you said what liberation is not. What is it not? Burnout. Let me say that again. Liberation is not burnout. Liberation is not
Burnout. We
Thank
need
you.
y'all.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and get started with a few questions and then I'll turn it over to the audience for additional questions. So first off, Latham, what inspired you to step into this work as a Black woman? And what support systems, whether they be personal, communal, or professional, have helped you to continue in your journey?
Yeah, so first of all, thank y'all so much for having me again. So I was born in Oakland, California, or raised, I should say, in Oakland, California. And at the time of when I was around 4 years old, my mom was pregnant, my aunt and my great aunt, all at the same time, due within a month of each other, March, April, and May. And I had a cousin who was maybe like 11 months older. And so she was about to also be a big sister. And if you can think about the height of a 4-year-old, you're about the height of the belly. So I just was like, oh my God, everybody has bellies like this. It's amazing. And my mom was really into education. So I had Grey's Anatomy coloring books. And I was, yeah, I could tell you everything because kids get obsessed about certain things, right? And so I was obsessed with the body. So I understood all of pelvic anatomy. So I would just randomly give people facts. And so my mom's like 7 months pregnant. And she's in the grocery store, and someone's like, "Oh, she has a baby in her tummy." It's like, "No, she has a baby in her uterus. It's coming out of her vagina." And so I was really, kind of fascinated by birth. And my sister came, and my mom, she really did, I think, a good job of like priming me for what that experience would be. But also, it was like happening in community. So the way that I designed my dramatic play was me and my cousin stuffing Cabbage Patch dolls under our shirts and pretending to deliver each other's babies. And so I didn't know that that would be the path forward, but it kind of was like the seed, right? That would sort of bring me into a calling. And then fast forward to when I became pregnant with my son, I was living in New York City, and I had recently graduated. I was at Columbia, recently graduated, and I was able to deliver with midwives at this freestanding birth center. It no longer exists, but it was the only freestanding birth center in New York City at the time, called Elizabeth Seton. And if anybody was outside, which y'all probably weren't because you weren't born yet, or you were really young. Well, actually, you weren't born. Okay, some of you guys weren't born yet, but some of you were. There was a place next door to where my son was born, and it was a nightclub that we all used to go called Nell's, and then it became the Derby and Up and Down. So my son thinks he was born in a nightclub, but it was right next door, and I had the most incredible experience there with experience of autonomy, and the care was incredible because when you would go in, how you would have your appointments, every moment from when you walked in to when you left was thought through. So for instance, when you go to your physician for an appointment, typically you'll go to a counter, someone receives you, they take your insurance, your cards, you fill out paperwork, you sit, you wait in the waiting room. In this instance, you go in, they've considered the lighting, the space is communal, but there's not a lot of weird places to sit because you don't really sit that long. You go behind the console to an area where all the records are, and you pull your file. And you take your file, then they ask you to do urine sample and weigh yourself. And you do it yourself, and you do it in your chart. So they teach you how to weigh yourself. They teach you on a scale, right? They teach you also how to read the urine strips and write down what you see. And so people are learning how to be part of this experience that's not just a physician or midwife telling you, but you participating in your care. So it's shared decision making, right? And so that was really important, I think, and informative for me, like, oh wow, like it could be different. And I had this incredible birth, and my son was born, and then they don't let you stay. So I was like 6 hours later, like, where are the grown-ups? But I go home, and I was like, oh, this is like my life now, But because it was so incredible, the birth itself, and a lot of people come to doula work because of birth trauma. And then on the other side of that, people come to it because they've had really empowering and beautiful experiences. And so it's kind of like a pendulum. And so I was one of those who had a really beautiful experience, and that led me to the work even deeper. But it was definitely a calling and not something that I would have chosen because I definitely like my sleep and all the things that would, I was like, am I like really a candidate to be a doula? But I was. And things like opened up when I took that path. But it happened after my son was born. And really, once I saw the kind of care that was possible, I wanted to make sure that other people had access to that. And so that became a journey, a decades-long journey. And then in 2018, launching our doula program at Mama Glow, which was also in response to what we saw as I mean, really seminal reporting had come out at the time from ProPublica and also the New York Times with Linda Villarosa, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. She had an article that went viral globally about Black maternal health and the disparities. And it actually, for some reason, clicked for people. And it was the first time there was real dialogue about this and what we could do. And so our course was starting in the midst of all of that conversation. And it gave people who were wanting to do something, who felt also not necessarily empowered, but felt like hopeless, it gave them a place to come to sit that and to lay that down, and also like take up skills and resource themselves to prepare to actually serve in spaces of birth work.
I think that's wonderful. One of the things you mentioned was that because of your lived experience of having a good birthing experience that brought you into the work. And then oftentimes, we've heard this narrative of Black maternal health sort of being associated with a lot of negativity. And, we do acknowledge the negativity in terms of, the maternal health crisis and how Black women are disproportionately affected. But I think the beautiful thing about you as a leader is that you took in your experience and said, okay, this is what I also want for other women.
Yeah.
And that's what led you to the work. And I think that that's a part of liberation too, is understanding what you want and then being able to share that goodness with other people.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, to add to that quickly, but I think at the center is joy, right? Like, I think it's not just surviving childbirth, it's birth should be transcendent. Like, people deserve to leave and feel transformed in a positive way. Like, that, like, birth is a pathway for us to become like a better version of ourselves, a new version of ourselves, but also like so much happens in that time where if we're supported well, that we really, it's like it imprints us epigenetically in a positive way, right? And so we have to think about like what that means for us generationally if birth goes well, if we get birth right. And it's not just, and I think a lot of our focus too is like, oh, well, maybe like go in the trenches and advocate so that you don't die. Like, why is that the benchmark? Right? Like, it shouldn't be here, the floor. We should be like, no, I deserve transcendence. I want to feel like everyone around me is singing kumbaya and it's warm in here and I got my candles, whatever it is you want. But it also you should leave there not feeling like a shell of yourself, which so many people feel and never heal from.
one of the things you had mentioned in your response is that you talked about shared decision making. So I want to get into I did my research on you.
Oh.
And so I wanted to get into the conversation, and you could talk more about it, but your shared decision making toolkit.
Yeah.
One of the things that we've seen throughout history is how community voice has helped to shape the direction and experience of research studies, programs, and movements, as you alluded to in your talk earlier. You've established the shared decision-making toolkit. I would like to know how you've used this toolkit and perhaps other outlets of community voice to rebuild trust with the populations you want to serve, presumably being those populations already trust you.
Yeah. So our community is really made up of doulas and care workers, nurse care managers, mostly, I would say, people of color. We have a lot of amazing people of all backgrounds, but I would say like that's where it skews. And of those people that are of marginalized identities, when they show up to this work, we are thinking about, and one of the things people talk about a lot is like, oh, I feel centered and seen in this work for the first time, right? And so a lot of the design of the programming and the solutions are, centering their voices. When we think about studies, which we've done them with doulas, we've done them with families, but the shared decision-making toolkit we actually designed with Aetna. And so it's co-branded, it's available to their nurse care managers, and it's based off of a training that we developed for doula competency. And that was because when we were talking to and surveying the nurses, they did not feel that they had adequate skills to work with, they call them at-risk populations, I would call them underestimated populations. They did not feel like they could adequately serve them. And so we sat in community like, well, let's talk about what that looks like. Like, what are the things, where are the areas you feel like you have impediments? And a lot of it was around like, we feel like we should actually learn the skills that doulas have, because when they show up, it's like things are smooth and whatever. Like, so we designed the training, and they did a training that we also, there were CEU credits for it, and so they got so people were incentivized. But then they came, and then we had workbooks, and off the workbook we designed this toolkit, because they were like, well, we need something to bring to the patient population. So on the commercial and Medicaid side of Aetna, they share this tool, and it's in their Women's Health Resource Center as well. And it's available free for download on mamaglow.com. You can get it for free. It's available to anyone to access. But it's also fourth grade reading level, which we really fought for, to make sure that like anybody could access it but understand it. We thought about accessibility across also intergenerationally, as we think about people who might encounter someone who's pregnant but like not know how to support that family member or friend. And so we thought about like all the different people who might encounter a particular person at some point during their pregnancy, and how we could help them feel most supported. And so the toolkit was really designed in that spirit. And then we worked with our community, we worked with our medical anthropology lead, like all of our researchers internally, and then we work with the Aetna team as well. And then obviously there's legal. And so then there was like, that took months to get through, and then it was gonna launch. And then we had a change in administrations, and then a whole DEI thing came into play, where there were things that we had advocated for to include that were no longer priorities, that could be like visible, because it would trigger essentially a lawsuit. And so we had to then figure out ways people had to language in different ways to ensure that we could still actually publish. And so just to understand the kind of climate that we're in, where you want to get information to people and that information is being policed, and also there are potential fines or even lawsuits that could come as a result of you actually just sharing information for communities that are marginalized. And so you would think that, some companies are still standing on that, right? But a lot of them have had to find um, interesting ways to address the current climate, and also ensure that they get their messaging out. But it was like, I mean, it threw everyone for a loop, because we were going to launch, and then they were like, actually, like, back up. Like, there's like 17,000 different things. We were like, what? And so, and we also saw in other areas where we had a doula pilot for federal employees, and that program was super successful. It was in its fourth year. And the federal government was like, we don't believe that people should have access to doula care in rural communities, and we're slashing the program, and we're basically not gonna pay the doulas. So we were actually negotiating a higher rate for the doulas, and they actually wanted us to come in under half of what they were already getting paid for the new rates. And we're like, how are people gonna, like, why would people continue to do this? So the framing of that was that the care providers were the ones at fault, not the federal government saying that we no longer want to fund this, or this is not a priority for us, right? So I think it's really important that, like, as we look at what's happening institutionally, to highlight and give voice to a lot of the tangible consequences of the time that we're living in, and what that means for how we design care, and also what it means for when we're building, as you all think about building, that in a time where you can't, like, DEI is like a bad word or whatever, it's so important to figure out the elegance of your design, so that whatever you construct, people can't figure out how to actually take it apart when you build it, right? And so what does that encoding look like, right? How do you build something that nobody can figure out how to destroy?
I love that you say that. I want to go back to what you talked about at the very beginning when we were getting introduced. Sorry, when we were getting introduced to you. I think one of the answers you've already provided, and that's looking at interdisciplinary care
Mm.
and looking at the intersectionality of how maternal health relates to all of these other outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak more to how your organization and you as a leader have adjusted given the current defunding, shifting away from, words and, just perspective of DEI and justice
Mhm.
and that whole narrative?
Yeah. So we're, I think, blessed to have a bunch of studies that are still, years before they're complete. But we have some that have completed that I know that if we were to seek funding for, wouldn't be funded because it wouldn't be priorities anymore. I think for us, a lot of what we do, because so much of our work is centered in community, we've been thinking a lot about like the impact on the caregivers, right, who are at the center. And so a lot of our solution building is about them. So one of the things that we launched this year that we didn't have before, we've always had like a self-care circle, which is like a retention space for the doulas, but we just launched a mental health circle that is for everyone just to come in and sit with this licensed mental health provider to be in community because we realize that people are not getting access to therapy. So things like that, I feel like that are like, community centered spaces. We host a lot of things that are like live and in person for folks to commune in as well. I think for families, it's also been really important for them to have mutual aid, especially with the just like the shift with like SNAP benefits and like WIC. What we saw was there's an organization actually in New York that we had partnered with to just do like groceries for people, like holiday and through January, because people were like, we don't know where our food, if our food's coming or not. And so, and I think that, when you get into what those of you who are like doing, a lot around food justice and food security understand that, but people who like don't have to worry about what they're eating every day don't really think that people go hungry, right? And so yeah, that's something that we've also centered, and I think nutrition is a big piece of it because like we as communities, especially where I live in New York City, like where we have a high concentration of delis and bodegas and places where you can get like high calorie, high sugar, high fat, high cholesterol, like snacks and like New York staples, but you cannot get like oat milk, or maybe you can get oat milk if you're in certain parts of the hood because like gentrification is real, but in general, right, we can't get like the foods that we need and we can't get them at like affordable prices. And so, and that's by design, right? And so that also impacts communities. So I think that we're looking at how the moment is impacting people and really listening and then trying to design solutions that we can that are just offerings that we can just add to like the bucket of things that we already do to bolster people. Because what I also know when we talked about burnout is that care workers burn out the most, who are closest to people who do high touch work, right? The nursing community, the doula community, the caretakers who look after our elders, like people who are home with their children. These people are doing like real high touch work where their health is impacted like so much, and we don't have, and most of them are underinsured or uninsured. And so we try to find solutions for people who we know like don't have the healthcare support, or healthcare, I should say, like safety net that they should have. And most of them are independent contractors, and so these are people who just don't have access to the safety net right now, or like they fall out of it because we have insurance apartheid in this country. So people who can afford insurance get like the best practitioners, and those who can't also get locked out of certain screenings and tools that could actually help them to like access better care. So it's like we're trying to meet those structural gaps, I would say, in terms of some of the service offerings that we can offer people as well.
So I told you this already, but I've been following you for a few years now on
Aw.
Instagram. So it was a pleasure when they asked me to interview you. And one of or your work has inspired some of my work. It was an article that I published last year, and it was titled "The Age of the Soft Girl Era: How Public Health Scholars May Seize Opportunity of Innovatively Promoting Reproductive Health and Nutritional Health Among Black Women of Color."
Ooh, I love it.
And you've established what's called, or what's known affectionately as the soft space.
Oh yeah.
It's described as a premium wellness education and events destination in Brooklyn. My question for you is, how have you balanced creating a soft space while making sure you execute necessary decisions that either protect or preserve your mission and the people you serve?
I mean, I think softness is at the core, right? Like wellness and self-care and slowing down and being intentional is at the core of the work, because I know that I can't do anything if I'm like hurried, and I'm a Taurus. We don't like being rushed. You know what I mean? So I'm like all about like moving slower and thinking things through and taking time. But also, I know that a lot of spaces that we should have access to, people don't feel welcome into or safe in. And so we wanted to design a space where everyone was welcome. And so we have this incredible library where people can go sit, and we have all of our amazing literary ancestors and children who have created such incredible literature, and just thought leaders across all genres, right? For books, we have an apothecary where there's like herbs and stuff, and we can make tonics and things for people. We have a beautiful sanctuary that has 25-foot ceiling skylights and stuff. And that space is really for grounding and coming in to just sort of get out of the fray of New York City. But it's usually for education and workshops and events. But a lot of partners will come in and do their kind of like team leadership things. Like CBS does all their women's health stuff there, mostly around like wellness, right? And so we use those tools that we have that are not just for times of, like people think like, oh, I'm stressed, I better meditate now. Or, let me do yoga, and then like my day is like crazy after that and I'm doing caffeine or whatever. It's really just like everything has to be about checking in on a moment to moment basis and responding. And that's what I think self care is. It's not like bubble bathing your problems away, but it's like listening to what your body's asking you in this moment and how you can honor that and make space for that. And I think that attentiveness is really important, but that is softness, right? It's like, oh, I need water right now. I need to eat right now. I need to sleep right now. This is too much. I need to go lay down right now. Like whatever it is, right? But I think that listening is important, and we're doing that also with our practitioner community. A lot of the doulas learn mindfulness tools so that they can actually survive the settings they're going into. Same with the nurse population. In New York, like 25% of nurses have quit. Yeah, right? And so they ask us to come. They're like, how do you retain people? I was like, well, how are you treating people? Right? Let's start there. And then we learn like these people are treated horribly. Like, of course they're leaving, right? And so, and I meet so many nurses who are living their best life, and they're like, girl, I'm doing like, liquid IVs at people's houses now, and I'm traveling, and I'm, living soft life because I'm not going to be in a hospital where they're stressing me out. So I think it's like, if we intend to send people into these spaces that are intended for care, we have to design better. We have to think about, creating spaces where they actually can thrive too. And patients' outcomes are going to be directly correlated with the type of care they receive and the way that those people show up in those spaces, right? So if I have an attitude, or if I'm upset, or if I'm charging the space and bringing that energy onto the patient, right? And so, and we see what that looks like because so many people share what their outcomes, share what their experiences are when they're inside of healthcare spaces. And so I think that it's time to actually look and excavate and see how we've built the systems that we've built these spaces upon, and really think about like how all of our institutional systems are really inherently carceral. So they're not about thriving, they're actually about like containing and confining people, separating them, not actually contributing to thriving, right? And so of course you have populations that are like suffering under that work within those spaces. And so much of what we're trying to do is liberate people from that. Like, let's design differently. Let's think about how we can do it differently. And by the way, so many people are interested in that, right? Like chiefs of hospitals, like, yeah, like I want people to stay here, but I also want them to be happy. How can we do that? So we're all figuring it out. And there's so many ways people are doing it. There's organizations that are like bringing art into hospitals so that like people are actually looking at murals when they come in, and that's changing things. There's organizations that are bringing in better food. There's organizations and partnerships with community-based organizations, which is amazing. There's a lot of grant opportunities to bring programs into hospitals to actually see if it makes people better. So I think that the fact that the funding exists because they're trying to figure out and actually measure tangibly what could happen and what it could look like, that's good. We're seeing it a lot, obviously, in maternal health. But what we need to do, I think, writ large, is really think about like the the longevity of these systems, like how they're built now. Like we need to rethink them. And I think the people in this room, I think the young people, are really the ones who are thinking outside of the box. They don't have no box, right? They're not thinking inside of the box. And they're applying solutions. Like there's young people, like I'm meeting, we have like summer fellows, we have interns, we have summer interns. These young people, the things that they're thinking and what they're designing are incredible. The projects that they're doing, like when they're just on vacation, are incredible. And so I feel like it's tapping into the power of youth and also that healthy dose of naivete for people who have not failed. They have this tenacity because they're not, marred with like all of the policy and all of the, you know, all of the like rules and the regulatory, frameworks that many of us have had to like live through. They come and think of something that nobody else has thought of. And so we need to bring them into the fold, right? And because a lot of these places are ageist and they're ableist, and they're not interested in talking to and listening to people who actually have been decentered, but who should really be at the table as well.
I would say, coming from a practitioner's background, one thing that I appreciate is you take it a step further in terms of not just bringing people in, inviting them into the room, but helping them to feel belonging, helping them to feel a sense of I'm welcomed here. I belong here. I am needed here in this space. I think oftentimes, especially in the very beginning, when this term equity and health equity and maternal health equity was brought into place, there was a lot of, oh well, let's just bring non-white women into the room, or let's just bring Black women into the room. But you invited them, but you didn't really make them feel belonging
Mm-hmm.
or belong in the room. So I do appreciate you for that. How are we on time? I figure. Okay. Because I can talk about this stuff all day. So I would like to open it up
Yes,
to questions.
we are
Okay.
we are at time,
Okay.
but I'm going to say we have an opportunity for a meet and greet for folks who still have a little bit of time to join us, and so maybe there can be some space for a little bit of question there. But can everyone give me put your hands together? There are the words for Latham Thomas and Dr. Vanessa Robinson.